The worst part about being falsely accused isn't the accusation itself. It's watching the person you love look at you like you're suddenly a stranger. That happened to me 3 days before Christmas during a snowstorm in Colorado, and my life has never been the same since. My name is Daniel Harper. I was 35 years old then, working as a civil engineer for a commercial construction company outside Denver. My wife Claire and I had been married for 6 years, living in a quiet suburb where every house looked almost identical once the snow started covering the lawns and rooftops. We weren't rich. We weren't glamorous. But I thought we were happy. Claire worked 12-hour shifts as a pediatric nurse at St. Anthony's Hospital, and most nights I'd wait up for her with reheated dinner and whatever reality show she liked pretending to hate. We had routines. Costco runs every other Saturday. Christmas movies playing too early in December. Pancakes every Sunday morning. The kind of small ordinary life people don't appreciate until it's gone. The night everything started, snow was falling so hard the roads looked powdered white under the streetlights. I remember gripping the steering wheel tightly as I drove my Ford F-150 through the storm to pick Claire up after her shift. The heater blasted warm air against my face while old Christmas songs crackled softly through the radio. Claire climbed into the passenger seat wearing navy blue scrubs and that exhausted smile I loved so much. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and she immediately reached for the coffee I'd brought her from a gas station near the hospital. "You're a lifesaver," she whispered before taking a sip. I can still hear her saying that. I can still remember how normal everything felt. Halfway home, Claire mentioned her younger sister Megan would be staying with us for a while. Apparently her boyfriend had broken up with her 2 days earlier, and she'd been crying non-stop at their mother's house. "Just until she gets back on her feet," Claire said quietly while watching the snow outside her window. I nodded immediately because that's what family does. Megan was 27, beautiful in the effortless social media kind of way, the type of person who could walk into a coffee shop wearing sweatpants and still look like she belonged in an ad campaign. She worked part-time at a boutique downtown and changed boyfriends almost as often as seasons. Claire worried about her constantly. Honestly, I mostly stayed out of it. When we pulled into our driveway 20 minutes later, I noticed another car parked outside our house. Megan's silver Honda Civic. Claire sighed softly under her breath like she was already mentally preparing herself for drama. Inside the house, the smell of vanilla candles mixed with leftover lasagna filled the air. Megan sat curled up on our couch wearing one of Claire's oversized sweaters, mascara smudged beneath her eyes. She looked fragile. Broken almost. The second she saw Claire, she burst into tears again. Claire rushed over to hug her while I awkwardly stood near the kitchen island holding grocery bags and melting snow dripping from my boots onto the hardwood floor. Megan looked up at me for maybe 2 seconds that night. But something about the way she looked at me made my stomach tighten. I couldn't explain it then. I just remember thinking it felt strange. Really strange. And I had no idea that look was the beginning of the worst nightmare of my life. Looking back now, I think the first real warning sign was how quickly Megan became comfortable in our house. Within 3 days, it stopped feeling like Claire and I were hosting a guest and started feeling like we had accidentally invited a storm into our marriage. At first, I tried to be understanding. Breakups hit people differently, and Megan had always been emotional. Some mornings I would come downstairs at 6:30 before work and find her sitting alone at the kitchen island wrapped in a blanket, staring into a mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier. Snow kept falling almost non-stop that week, turning our neighborhood into a postcard. The roofs were white. The sidewalks disappeared under layers of ice. Every morning I had to warm up my truck for 10 minutes while scraping frost from the windshield. Claire was picking up extra shifts at the hospital because flu season had overwhelmed the pediatric unit, which meant Megan and I ended up alone in the house more often than either of us expected. That was when things started feeling off. Small things at first. Tiny moments that are easy to ignore until your entire life falls apart and you replay them in your head 1,000 times. One afternoon I came home early because a concrete delivery had been delayed by weather conditions. I walked into the kitchen carrying takeout burgers from Five Guys, expecting the house to be empty. Instead, Megan was standing at the counter wearing leggings and one of Claire's old college sweatshirts. She jumped slightly when she saw me like I had caught her doing something wrong. "You scared me," she laughed nervously while brushing her hair behind her ear. I remember noticing she had put on makeup for the first time all week. Not much. Just enough to look different. "Claire is still at work?" I asked. Megan nodded. Then she stared at me for a second too long before quietly saying, "You know Claire is lucky to have someone like you, right?" The comment itself was harmless. But something about the tone made my stomach tighten again. I laughed awkwardly and changed the subject, but after that I started noticing other things. Sometimes I would catch Megan watching me when she thought I was not paying attention. At dinner, she would ask strangely personal questions about my marriage. Whether Claire and I argued. Whether we wanted children. Whether I ever regretted getting married young. Once, while Claire was upstairs showering, Megan suddenly asked me if I believed people could fall in love with the wrong person by mistake. I remember setting my beer bottle down slowly because the question felt loaded somehow. "I think people get confused when they are hurting," I answered carefully. She stared at me with this unreadable expression before whispering, "Yeah. Maybe." That night, I told Claire her sister was acting strange. Claire barely looked up from folding laundry. "She is heartbroken, Daniel. Stop overthinking everything." Maybe she was right. Maybe I should have ignored the feeling in my chest. But 2 nights later, around 11:40, I walked downstairs for a glass of water and froze halfway into the kitchen. Megan was sitting alone in the dark except for the blue glow from her phone screen. The second she saw me, she flipped the phone face down so fast it looked almost panicked. Then she forced a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Could not sleep?" she asked softly. I remember nodding slowly while reaching for a glass from the cabinet. But before I walked back upstairs, I noticed something that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Megan's phone wallpaper was a picture of me. At first I honestly convinced myself I had imagined it. Standing there in the kitchen at nearly midnight with snow tapping softly against the windows, I kept telling myself there had to be another explanation for why Megan had my picture on her phone screen. Maybe she had taken it from Claire's social media. Maybe it was part of some collage or family album. Maybe I was overreacting because the entire atmosphere in the house already felt tense and strange. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The problem was that I did not know how wrong yet. The next morning, I barely slept before driving to a construction site in Boulder for a concrete inspection meeting. The roads were slick with black ice, and traffic crawled for miles beneath gray skies. Normally I love driving alone because it gave me time to think, but that morning my stomach felt twisted the entire way there. I kept replaying the look on Megan's face when she flipped her phone over. Panic. Real panic. Around lunchtime, Claire called me during her break at the hospital. I almost told her everything right then. I almost told her that her sister's behavior was making me uncomfortable. But Claire sounded exhausted. I could hear hospital monitors beeping in the background and nurses talking over the intercom. Megan finally slept through the night, Claire said with relief in her voice. "I think she is starting to recover." Recover. That word stayed in my head all day. Because by the time I got home that evening, Megan looked nothing like someone recovering. She looked focused. Calm. Almost determined. Claire was upstairs taking a bath when Megan asked if I could help carry storage boxes down to the basement. I hesitated for maybe half a second before agreeing because refusing would have felt strange. The basement smelled faintly like detergent and dust, with old Christmas decorations stacked along one wall and Claire's childhood photo albums packed into plastic bins. Megan stood near the washing machine while I set down the last box. "Thanks," she said quietly. I nodded and turned to leave, but then she suddenly spoke again. "Can I ask you something personal?" The tone of her voice immediately made me uncomfortable. "Depends," I answered carefully. She folded her arms across her chest and looked directly at me. "Are you happy with Claire?" The question hit me so unexpectedly that I laughed awkwardly. "What kind of question is that?" Megan shrugged without smiling. "You just seem lonely sometimes." I remember staring at her because the comment felt so inappropriate I genuinely did not know how to respond. "I love my wife," I said firmly. "Very much." Something flickered across Megan's face then. Embarrassment maybe. Or disappointment. But it vanished quickly. "Forget I said anything," she whispered before brushing past me toward the stairs. That should have been the end of it. It should have been an uncomfortable conversation we all moved on from. Instead, 2 days later, Claire announced her parents were hosting an early Christmas dinner on Sunday night since her father would be traveling for work the following week. The second Claire mentioned it, I noticed Megan go strangely quiet at the kitchen table. She stopped eating completely and stared down at her plate for several seconds. Then she forced a smile and said, "That sounds nice." But there was something cold hiding behind her expression. Something rehearsed. Later that night, while Claire slept beside me upstairs, I walked into the kitchen for water again and noticed Megan standing outside alone in the backyard despite the freezing temperature. Snowflakes drifted around her under the porch light while she spoke quietly into her phone. I could not hear everything through the glass door. Just fragments. "Sunday night," she whispered. Then after a long silence she said something that made my chest tighten instantly. "He still does not suspect anything." By Sunday afternoon, I felt like I was walking towards something bad without understanding why. The entire day carried this strange pressure I could not shake. Even the weather felt heavier somehow. Thick gray clouds hung low over the neighborhood while fresh snow covered the streets in uneven white layers that squeaked beneath our boots. Claire spent most of the morning wrapping Christmas presents at the dining room table while old jazz music played softly through the kitchen speakers. Megan barely spoke at all. She sat curled beneath a blanket on the couch scrolling through her phone with an expression so blank it almost looked rehearsed. Every once in a while, I would catch her glancing at me before quickly looking away. Around 4:30, we drove to Claire's parents' house across town for dinner. Their neighborhood was wealthier than ours, full of oversized homes with stone driveways and elaborate Christmas lights glowing against the snow. Claire's father, Richard Collins, worked in commercial real estate and treated holiday decorating like a competition with the entire street. Giant wreaths hung from every window. White lights wrapped around the trees in perfect symmetry. The house looked warm and beautiful from the outside. I remember thinking how normal everything still appeared. Inside, the smell of cinnamon, roasted turkey, and red wine filled the air immediately. Claire's mother Diane greeted us at the door wearing a dark green sweater and pearl earrings, kissing Claire on the cheek before barely acknowledging me with a distracted smile. Looking back now, even that feels different in my memory. Like everyone already knew something I did not. Dinner started normally enough. Football played quietly in the living room while snow drifted outside the windows. Richard talked about interest rates and vacation properties in Arizona. Claire laughed at something her cousin Tyler said about airport delays. I even helped Diane carry dishes into the kitchen afterward while Megan stayed unusually quiet near the end of the table. Then everything changed in less than 30 seconds. I still replay that moment in my head almost every night. Diane had just brought out dessert when Megan suddenly dropped her fork onto the plate. The sound cut through the room sharply enough that everyone looked at her. Her face had gone pale. Her breathing looked uneven. At first Claire immediately reached toward her sister in concern. "Meg, are you okay?" Megan stared down at the table for several seconds before tears started sliding down her cheeks. Real tears. Her shoulders shook as she covered her mouth with both hands. The entire room went silent except for the faint sound of Christmas music coming from the kitchen speaker. "I cannot do this anymore," she whispered. Richard frowned deeply. Do what? Megan looked directly at Claire first. Then slowly at me. And in that instant something cold spread through my chest because I suddenly understood this had something to do with me. I am pregnant, she said shakily. Claire's eyes widened immediately. Wait, what? Megan started crying harder. I tried to hide it because I did not want to destroy everything. My pulse started hammering in my ears. I remember gripping the edge of the dining table so tightly my fingers hurt. Then Megan said the sentence that destroyed my life. Daniel is the father. For maybe 3 full seconds nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Claire looked at me with complete confusion, like her brain physically could not process what she had just heard. Richard slowly stood from his chair. Diane covered her mouth in shock. I actually laughed once because the accusation sounded so insane I genuinely thought Megan had lost her mind. What are you talking about? I said immediately. My voice sounded distant even to myself. Megan was crying uncontrollably now. Please stop pretending, she whispered through tears. I cannot carry this by myself anymore. Then she reached into her purse beside the chair and pulled out her phone. And the second she held it up toward Claire, my entire body went numb. The screen of Megan's phone was shaking in her hand as she held it toward Claire, but I could still see enough to feel my stomach drop. Text messages. Dozens of them. Messages supposedly between me and Megan. Some were short. Some were emotional. A few looked flirtatious in ways that made my skin crawl because I knew I had never written them. Claire grabbed the phone with trembling hands while tears instantly filled her eyes. Daniel, she whispered so quietly I almost did not hear it. I stood up so fast my chair scraped hard against the hardwood floor. Those are fake, I said immediately. Claire, I swear to you, I never sent any of that. But nobody was listening anymore. Richard snatched the phone from Claire and started scrolling through the messages with growing fury in his face. Diane looked physically sick. Megan sat there crying into her hands like she was completely devastated. It was so convincing that even I started questioning reality for half a second. Then Megan said something that made the room explode completely. He told me not to tell anyone because he said Claire would leave him. Claire stared at me like she could not breathe. I remember taking one step toward her instinctively, but she backed away so fast it felt like someone punched me in the chest. Do not touch me, she whispered. That was the exact moment panic truly hit me. Not anger. Not confusion. Panic. Because suddenly I realized my wife believed her. Claire, listen to me, I said desperately. This is insane. You know me. You know I would never do something like this. Megan kept crying. I did not want to ruin Christmas, she whispered shakily. I just could not keep lying anymore. Richard slammed his palm against the dining table hard enough to rattle the dishes. How long? He demanded while glaring at me with pure disgust. How long has this been going on? Nothing has been going on, I said immediately. She is lying. Diane looked at Megan with horror. Sweetheart, are you sure? Megan slowly nodded through tears. I found out 6 weeks ago. Claire suddenly covered her mouth and started crying. Seeing her cry broke something inside me because I knew she was not crying for me anymore. She was crying because she thought her husband had betrayed her with her own sister. Please, I said quietly while looking directly at Claire. You cannot honestly believe this. But. Before Claire could answer, Megan pulled something else from her purse. A folded medical paper. She handed it toward Diane with shaking hands. I went to the clinic last Tuesday, she whispered. I was too scared to tell anyone. Diane unfolded the paper slowly while Richard leaned over her shoulder. The second they saw it, the entire room changed. Oh my God, Diane whispered. It looked like an ultrasound appointment summary with Megan's name printed at the top. I could physically feel the room turning against me. Every face. Every expression. Claire looked shattered. Richard looked ready to throw me through the wall. Even Claire's cousin Tyler stared at me like I was some stranger who had wandered into the house pretending to belong there. I did not touch your sister, I said again, but my voice sounded weaker now because nobody believed me anymore. Then Claire asked the question I had been terrified of hearing. Did anything happen while I was working those overnight shifts? The fact she even had to ask almost destroyed me. No, I answered instantly. Never. Megan looked up slowly with tears streaming down her face. How can you lie so easily, she whispered. And somehow that question hurt worse than everything else. There is a moment when your life stops feeling real and starts feeling like you are trapped inside somebody else's nightmare. For me, it happened while snow fell quietly outside Claire's parents' dining room windows and everyone I loved stared at me like I was disgusting. I kept trying to speak, but every sentence sounded weaker than the last because Megan already controlled the room completely. She cried at the perfect moments. She looked embarrassed instead of angry. Vulnerable instead of manipulative. And the worst part was that Claire's face slowly changed every second she looked at those fake messages. The trust in her eyes disappeared right in front of me. Claire, I said again carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. You know me better than anyone here. But before she could answer, Richard stepped directly between us. I think you should leave, he said coldly. I actually laughed once because the situation still felt impossible to me. Leave. Richard, your daughter is accusing me of something insane. Do not say her name like that, Diane snapped immediately. Megan covered her face and started crying harder. Claire looked completely shattered now, sitting frozen in her chair while tears rolled silently down her cheeks. I walked toward her slowly, desperate for her to just look at me the way she used to. Claire, please, I whispered. You cannot honestly believe I would ever betray you. She finally looked up at me then, and I swear I still see that expression in my nightmares. Not rage. Not hatred. Disappointment. Pure heartbreak. I do not know what to believe anymore, she whispered. That sentence broke me worse than if she had screamed. Because deep down I realized she already doubted me. Richard pointed toward the front door. Get out of my house. No, I answered immediately. Not until somebody listens to me. Tyler stood up from the couch in the living room then, clearly uncomfortable but still watching me carefully like I might suddenly become dangerous. Diane moved protectively beside Megan while rubbing her shoulder. The entire family had unconsciously formed around her. Around the victim they thought they needed to protect. Meanwhile I stood alone in the middle of the dining room like some criminal waiting for judgment. Then Claire slowly pulled off her wedding ring. I remember the tiny metallic sound it made hitting the table before she pushed it toward me without saying a word. My chest went completely numb. Claire, her voice cracked when she finally spoke. Did you ever touch her? The question itself felt unreal. No, I answered instantly. Never. Megan suddenly stood up crying. Please stop lying, she whispered. You promised me you would tell her after Christmas. Richard exploded after that. He stormed toward me so fast I instinctively stepped backward. You sick son of a... Claire immediately stood up too, begging everyone to stop yelling, but it did not matter anymore. The room had already chosen a side. I grabbed my coat from the chair near the kitchen while my hands shook uncontrollably. This is not real, I kept saying. This is not real. But nobody answered me. Claire would not even look at me anymore. As I reached the front door, Megan suddenly whispered something so quietly only I could hear it. I am sorry. I froze instantly and looked back at her. Her eyes met mine for maybe 1 second before she looked away again and started crying harder into Diane's shoulder. That was the moment I realized something even more terrifying than the accusation itself. Megan was lying. And somehow she already knew she was going to get away with it. 10 minutes later I sat alone inside my truck while heavy snow covered the windshield and my phone buzzed non-stop with messages from Claire's family calling me disgusting, pathetic, and evil. But the message that truly shattered me came from Claire herself. Do not come home tonight. I spent the next 3 nights living inside a roadside motel 20 miles outside Denver, and I do not think I have ever felt loneliness like that in my entire life. The place smelled like stale cigarettes and industrial cleaning chemicals no matter how high I turned the heater. Every morning I woke up to the sound of 18-wheelers roaring past Interstate 25 while pale winter sunlight leaked through cheap plastic blinds. I barely slept at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Claire pushing her wedding ring across that dining room table. I kept replaying the accusation over and over in my head trying to understand how my life had collapsed in less than 10 minutes. On Monday morning, I drove to work pretending everything was normal because I honestly did not know what else to do. Snow covered the construction site in Boulder so heavily that crews were already behind schedule by nearly 2 days. Normally the noise and routine helped me focus. Concrete mixers. Backup alarms. Men yelling measurements across steel framing. But that morning every conversation seemed to stop when I walked past. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe not. Around lunch, my supervisor Mark asked me to step into his trailer office. He looked uncomfortable before I even sat down. Everything okay at home? He asked carefully. My stomach tightened instantly. Why? Mark hesitated before turning his monitor slightly toward me. Somebody had posted anonymously in a local community Facebook group the night before. No names at first. Just vague accusations about a married engineer sleeping with his wife's younger sister. But people in the comments had already figured out it was me. I physically felt the blood drain from my face while scrolling through strangers calling me disgusting. This is not true, I said immediately. Mark rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. I figured there was probably another side to it. Probably. That word stayed with me the entire drive back to the motel later that evening. Nobody fully believed me anymore. Not even people trying to be polite. By the 3rd night, I stopped eating real meals entirely. Just microwave burritos, gas station coffee, and whatever snacks came out of the vending machine near the ice machine downstairs. Claire still refused to answer my calls. Every text I sent stayed unread for hours before eventually turning blue with no response. Then, around 2:13 Wednesday morning, my phone buzzed beside the bed while an old sitcom played muted on the television. I grabbed it so fast my hands almost dropped the phone. It was Claire. Just one message. Something does not feel right. I stared at those 4 words for almost a full minute. My heart started pounding so hard it hurt. I immediately called her, but she did not answer. I texted back asking what she meant. No response. But for the first time since the accusation, I felt something dangerous creeping back into my chest. Hope. The next morning, I showered, shaved, and put on clean clothes for the first time in days because suddenly my brain would not stop replaying one detail from that night at dinner. Megan whispering, "I am sorry," before I left. Why would she apologize if I was guilty? Around noon, I drove toward the women's clinic listed on the paperwork Megan showed her family. The roads were still lined with dirty piles of melting snow while gray clouds hung low across the city. I had no real plan. I just knew something about the timeline felt wrong. 6 weeks pregnant. Overnight shifts. Fake texts. None of it added up anymore. But the second I walked into that clinic lobby, and the receptionist looked at me with confusion instead of recognition, I realized my nightmare was only beginning. The women's clinic sat between a dentist office and a frozen yogurt shop in a quiet shopping plaza covered with dirty snowbanks and slush. I remember sitting in my truck for almost 10 minutes before finally forcing myself to walk inside because part of me was terrified I would discover something that made everything worse. The lobby smelled like coffee and disinfectant. Soft instrumental music played quietly through ceiling speakers while a fake fireplace flickered in the corner near a stack of parenting magazines. Two women sat across from me filling out paperwork while a receptionist typed behind the front desk wearing pink scrubs and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think straight. I walked to the counter and cleared my throat awkwardly. "Hi," I said quietly. "I know this might sound strange, but I have a question about a patient who came here recently." The receptionist gave me a cautious professional smile immediately. "I cannot share private medical information, sir." "I understand," I said quickly. "I am not asking for records. I think someone may have used this clinic in a situation involving me." Even saying those words out loud made me feel pathetic. The receptionist studied my face for a second before asking for the patient's first name. "Megan Collins," I answered. The moment I said her name, something shifted in the woman's expression. Not recognition exactly. More like confusion. She turned toward her computer screen briefly before looking back at me slowly. "Wait," she said carefully. "You are not the man who came with her." I swear my entire body went cold in that instant. "What man?" I asked immediately. The receptionist blinked like she had realized she said too much already. "I really should not discuss patient visits." "Please," I whispered. "My wife thinks I got her sister pregnant. I need to know if I am losing my mind." The woman stared at me for several uncomfortable seconds before lowering her voice slightly. "The patient was here about 3 weeks ago. She was accompanied by someone else." I could barely breathe. "Did she identify him as her boyfriend?" The receptionist hesitated. "I do not know exactly what their relationship was." Then she looked directly at me and quietly added, "But it definitely was not you." For a second I genuinely thought my knees might give out. Relief hit me so fast it almost hurt. Because finally, somebody confirmed what I already knew. Megan had lied. But relief lasted only a few seconds before something darker replaced it. If Megan came here with another man, then why accuse me? Why destroy my marriage? Why fake evidence? My thoughts started racing so fast I could barely keep up with them. "Do you remember anything else?" I asked desperately. The receptionist shook her head immediately. "I have already said too much." I thanked her anyway and walked back toward the parking lot feeling like the ground beneath my feet had shifted completely. Snow crunched under my boots while freezing wind cut across the plaza, but I barely felt the cold anymore. I sat inside my truck gripping the steering wheel trying to process what I had just learned. Then another memory suddenly slammed into me. Megan whispering outside on the phone. "He still does not suspect anything." My chest tightened instantly because suddenly the accusation felt planned. Deliberate. Not emotional chaos. Not panic. A setup. I grabbed my phone and called Claire immediately. Straight to voicemail again. I texted her 3 times in a row. Megan lied. She went to the clinic with another man. Please call me. 10 minutes later, my phone finally buzzed. But it was not Claire. It was Megan. Just one message. Stop digging before you make things worse. I stared at Megan's text message for almost a full minute while freezing rain tapped against my windshield in the clinic parking lot. Stop digging before you make things worse. Not, you are wrong. Not, leave me alone. Worse. That word echoed in my head the entire drive back toward the motel because it sounded less like fear and more like a warning. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, the sky had already gone dark even though it was barely after 5 in the evening. Winter in Colorado always made days feel shorter, but that night the darkness felt suffocating. I barely slept again. Every time my eyes closed, new questions kept crashing into me. Who was the man at the clinic? Why was Megan protecting him? And the biggest question of all, why destroy me specifically? Around 7 the next morning, I went back to our house for the first time since Claire told me not to come home. I knew she was at the hospital working another double shift, and I honestly just wanted clean clothes and a few work documents from my office upstairs. Snow had started melting slightly, leaving muddy slush along the driveway and sidewalk. For a second, sitting in my truck outside the house, I almost convinced myself none of this was real. The wreath still hung on the front door. Christmas lights still blinked along the gutters. It still looked like my home. But the second I stepped inside, the silence hit me immediately. Cold. Empty. Wrong. Megan's suitcase still sat near the staircase, but the house smelled different somehow without Claire there. Like stale air and untouched rooms. I moved quickly upstairs grabbing shirts, jeans, and paperwork from my desk while trying not to think too much about the framed wedding photos still sitting on our dresser. Then something strange caught my attention. Megan's bedroom door was partially open even though she always kept it shut. At first I ignored it. But as I walked past, I noticed her phone charger plugged into the wall beside the bed. And lying on the comforter near the pillow was a small black cell phone I had never seen before. Not her regular phone. A second phone. My pulse immediately started racing. I stepped into the room slowly, almost feeling guilty even looking at it. The phone looked cheap. One of those prepaid burner phones people buy at gas stations or convenience stores. The screen lit up the second I picked it up. No password. Just dozens of unread notifications. My stomach dropped instantly. Text messages. Call logs. Voice recordings. Everything hidden from her real phone. My hands actually started shaking while I scrolled through them. Most conversations were between Megan and an unknown number saved only as J. The messages made my blood run cold. Claire still believes it. Daniel has no idea. My mom says we have to stay consistent. My vision blurred for a second because suddenly this was bigger than Megan lying alone. Her mother knew. Diane knew. Then I opened one audio file dated 4 nights before the Christmas dinner. Megan's voice filled the room immediately. Calm. Completely different from the crying victim act she performed in front of everyone. I cannot keep covering for him forever, she whispered. Then a male voice answered quietly through static. You said your family would protect us. Us. My chest tightened painfully. Megan continued speaking. My mother said Daniel is the safest option. Claire trusts him enough that nobody would question why I was around him. I physically stopped breathing after hearing that sentence. Because in that exact moment, I realized the accusation was never personal. I was chosen. Used. Sacrificed. And the most horrifying part was that my wife still had absolutely no idea her own family had destroyed her marriage to protect somebody else.